morning there. Thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate you joining us. I hope you didn't get confused like I did and go to the philanthropy luncheon down at the Peabody first. But in case it puts you in a philanthropic mood, we'll be happy to take your donations here if you so desire. We certainly will, even though Randy's already pointed out our big donors down here and how much we appreciate them and how much we appreciate all of you for the support that you give the State Chamber. Let me also take just an opportunity to recognize Randy, because I tell you, without his leadership, I don't know what in the world we'd do. He does such a great job for the State Chamber, as do all the staff that he introduced today. I've been in this position for 2 years, and I tell you, he's made it very, very easy for me. And I think through his leadership, mostly, we've gotten a whole lot done in the state and made this a better place to do business for all of us. So help me thank Randy for all of his leadership. And it's now my privilege to introduce Governor Beebe, which I have done several times, and I always feel a little silly getting up here with written remarks because he always says, "Why are you doing that? You know, why are you?" And truly, if anybody didn't need an introduction, it's Governor Beebe, who's dedicated most of his adult life to improving the state of Arkansas through better education and economic development. Those have obviously been the cornerstone of his administration while he's been governor. We've been so fortunate to have his leadership in the state of Arkansas during these trying economic times that we've always been through. And as he always tells me, if you need to give me a long introduction, then I'm not doing my job. So with that, I think we would all agree, and so do most of the people of the state of Arkansas, that he's doing a very good job. So with that, please help me welcome our governor, Mike Beebe.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I have just some brief remarks because you have a keynote speaker and I have another place to be. But I've been instructed to really make 2 points. The first is that in light of recent elections, both on the state level and on the national level, in light of what we've seen on the national level, it is incumbent on all of us to be able to reach common ground and to work together for the benefit of the people who are our bosses. And I hope on the national level that a message has been sent, notwithstanding the fact that they appear to be continuing the same division that they had before, but I hope that the message has been sent that they expect those folks to work together. I know that message exists in Arkansas because Arkansas has consistently and continuously been able to work together, and I always see that glass half full, and I have no doubt that we'll be able to do that in Arkansas, because I have no doubt that Republicans and Democrats alike want to ensure that the people of Arkansas are properly represented, and that whatever gridlock may exist elsewhere in the country, that will not exist with our own people. To that end, it is incumbent, I think, on the people in this room to educate yourselves on the various possible scenarios on any given issue that will confront us as a people. Satisfy yourself about all sides and all arguments, pro and con, for any given issue. And then utilize, as you should, your leadership and your leadership positions to ensure that people in Arkansas actually work together in a way that benefits all of the people of our state in a fashion that allows us to continue what has to be the extraordinary progress under anybody's scenario that all Arkansans should be proud of and that all Arkansans should take credit for. You must, it seems to me, going forward, exert your leadership capacity because it is vital and important to our people. I'm not trying to tell you to exert it on this issue or that issue. As I indicated, I want you to inform yourself on the various issues and make up your own mind. But once you do, please try to utilize what you can to ensure progress as opposed to gridlock. The other thing that I've been tasked, I think, to mention is way more substantive than anything I normally get up here and talk about with regard to my brief remarks in front of this annual meeting, and that's specifically Medicaid. And without trying to influence you one way or the other, merely being informative, let me just take a very brief moment to, I guess, highlight what the issues are. And then again, you make up your own mind and decide what you think is important. And if you think it's important, is that a Geiger counter? Eddie Joe, did you sabotage this thing? There are three distinct, however, somewhat interrelated issues as it deals with Medicaid. Now, you don't want to hear all this deep stuff about Medicaid when we're usually talking about grander ideas of education, economic development, and how we improve the quality of life of our people. But I think it's such a confusing issue that I need to just briefly mention all three. First, you've got payment reform. Payment reform has nothing to do with Obamacare, has nothing to do with Medicaid expansion, but it does have some degree of an effect on both. Payment reform was really our approach in Arkansas long before they started doing anything in Washington. We started talking about this a couple years ago before they passed anything. And frankly, I suggested to people in Washington they ought to be tackling this problem first, and that's costs, health care costs. If anybody understands that, it's the employers and the businesses that are represented in this room. And we came to the conclusion, I was convinced by some of the people that work for me, primarily our Surgeon General, fee-for-service is unsustainable. The good news is doctors, hospitals, healthcare providers, insurance companies, patients, all sorts of folks that interact in this network have really worked for a couple of years hard together to try to stop this spiraling cost curve in healthcare costs. And that's being done through payment reform. And it's gradually, but with some degree of sensitivity and input from the people that are actually having to do the work on the front line, changing away from fee-for-service, which pays for every time somebody writes something on a chart or every time somebody does another test. And you got to be careful because you got to do that in a way that doesn't adversely impact quality, or else you're really going in the wrong direction. It is extremely complex, but the extraordinary cooperation we've seen in the business community and healthcare community across the board, and I got to tell you, your state chamber's done a wonderful job in helping educate everybody about this and having input into all of it. It is one issue. Set it over here. Second issue is Medicaid shortfall. We have a shortfall in Medicaid. That means that we are going to either have to cut services or come up with some more money, or more probably a combination of both, in order to keep our budget balanced. There are a number of ways potentially we could do that. But let me explain the major reason why we got a Medicaid shortfall. There's another reason, there's a couple of reasons, but the biggest reason we got a Medicaid shortfall is your fault. We are the victim of our own success. Arkansas has passed more states, I think, than anybody in the country, certainly climbed 4 higher than we have ever been in per capita income. Now, we're still way down. I think we're 44th according to the last numbers, and I don't like being 44th in anything, but we were 48th 4 years ago, ladies and gentlemen. And when you're now 44th in the statistic that's the hardest to change, it's great news. And you all in this room, together with so many others, are largely responsible for the fact that our people are climbing the ladder vis-a-vis their sister states, or in some cases not going backwards as fast as the sister states. And consequently, we have our formula changed. Because you see, in the past, the feds paid 75% of the Medicaid budget, the existing Medicaid budget, and we paid 25%. Because we have climbed these per capita income rankings and because of what we've done as a state, the formula's changed. We now have to pay roughly 30% instead of 25%. So it's going to be a 70-30 match, and every percent's about a $40 million hit on the existing program. So the major reason, there's another couple of reasons, but the major reason for the Medicaid shortfall is because we have gone up in our income and the federal match changes accordingly. Set that aside. The third issue is Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion is the one part of what they called Obamacare that the state has some discretion over. You don't have any more discretion over whether you got it or not. The Supreme Court ruled. They didn't throw it out. The people acted, and they kept a Democratic Senate, a Republican House, and a Democratic president. It's not likely to change on the federal level. And I don't have any control over what happens on the federal level, and if you want any control, then you're going to have to do something about it on the federal level, not with me. So the one area that the Supreme Court said you still got some degree of discretion over is whether you accept Medicaid expansion or not. Very briefly, Medicaid, as opposed to Medicare, Medicaid is that 70-30 program now I'm talking about, and it primarily, there's some exceptions, primarily covers kids right now and nursing homes. Folks in nursing homes, that's it. Now, there's some other examples, but I'm oversimplifying this to get the heck out of here and let your keynote speaker come talk about whatever he's going to talk about. This Medicaid expansion covers working people with $30,000 a year income and below that are between 18 and 64. Now, here's the kicker on this. It takes 75% of the House and 75% of the Senate to accept Medicaid expansion. And you've seen some states say they're not going to accept it. I was worried about it at the outset because I wanted to know if we couldn't afford in whatever match we had to pay, could we get out of it? They told me we could. I said, I don't believe you. I want it in writing. So we got it in writing. That solved my initial problem. So while I'm not trying to tell you which way to go on this, I think you're intelligent enough to make up your own minds. I'm going to tell you it's convinced me it's the right thing for the people of Arkansas. But if 3/4 of the House and Senate don't want to do it, it's not going to happen anyway. Here is what happens. Medicaid expansion can have a peripheral effect by several $1 million on the Medicaid shortfall. Additionally, we're going to be paying these taxes federally that covers this, or this deficit federally that our children are going to be paying, whether we accept it or whether we don't accept it. And if there's 6, 8, or 10 states that don't accept it, that's fine. They're still going to be paying too. I don't want to leave our Kansans out, and I'm going to tell you it's going to save some hospitals. It's going to save some rural hospitals. It's $23 million, isn't it, Dr. Ron, to you? Annually. $23 million to UAMS alone. If we don't get it, there will be services cut. If we don't get it, there are some rural hospitals that will be significantly hurt. Most importantly, if we don't get it, there are a lot of people that are going to be uncovered, and they are what's causing all of our insurance premiums to go up if they're showing up in the emergency rooms for more expensive care, and hospitals have to treat them for nothing. And they do, because under the law they have to, and that's called uncompensated care. And that means you and I that carry insurance get our insurance premiums jacked up, and I'm not picking on hospitals. I chaired a hospital board for 10 years. That jacks up our hospital premiums because they can't run at a loss, or our insurance premiums, because they can't run at a loss. So they have to make up the losses on all the uncompensated care by those of us that are carrying it. It will have a positive effect on the rest of us that aren't covered by Medicaid in helping to work together with payment reform to keep those costs from going up. Now, it may sound like I am trying to influence you. I'm telling you the truth as I see it. Other people can tell you the truth as they see it, and you're smart enough to figure it out, or you wouldn't be running the companies you're running and making the jobs that you're making. You can make up your own mind as to what's true and what's not true. But I'll use an analogy that I've been using. It's like federal highway money. Maybe we can't afford it. Maybe there's hey, I've been talking about deficits on the federal level before those people started talking about it, okay? And we actually had a governor from Arkansas that had that figured out and had it fixed for a while in Washington, D.C. before they messed it up there. So I'm a proponent of balancing a budget. We do it here. And I'm a proponent of getting rid of this deficit. But to use the analogy, if you're going to be spending highway dollars and we're going to be paying that in the way of our taxes to Washington, or in terms of our children paying for that deficit going forward, I don't want to leave Arkansas out. Don't send my highway money to California. Don't send my highway money to New York. And don't send my Medicaid money to Illinois and leave my people and my hospitals and my doctors and my employers and my folks in Arkansas out. That's where I am. Those are three distinct, different Medicaid issues. As you go forward and watch all three, understand they are three distinct, different problems and different issues, but to some extent they have some interrelation and they affect one another. I normally don't come make a speech as though I'm teaching a college class. I've been asked to do it today because it's an important issue. You all are important people that influence important decisions, and you need to know what I know as I see it. And as I say, there are folks on the other side that will give you a different picture. I trust your judgment to listen to what everybody's got to say and figure it out for yourself. I've oversimplified it. I've gone in a hurry, but I think it's important. And you know, y'all quit eating and started listening. It's the dangest bunch I ever saw. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Governor. I'm really actually filling in today, too, for my partner in crime, who's the chairman of the Associated Industries of Arkansas, Bill Hanna, who I'm going to tell on him, Brad. You know, I'd like to say that he's the CEO of Navholz, by the way. I'd like to say he's on some really important construction project, but I've seen evidence to know that he's shooting creatures out of a helicopter south of San Antonio. So we wish him the best, but I really would like to take an opportunity to recognize him and his leadership over the last 2 years as well. He's done a great job and been a great partner to work with during this time. It's now my pleasure to introduce Robert Bryce, our featured speaker. Robert, who's been writing about the energy business since 1989, spent 12 years writing for the Austin Chronicle. From 2006 to September of 2010, he worked as the managing editor of the Houston-based online publication Energy Tribune. In April 2010, he joined the Manhattan Institute as a senior fellow in the think tank Center for Energy Policy and Environment. His articles have appeared in dozens of publications, including the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, National Review, Washington Post, and The Guardian. Bryce's latest book, Power Hungry: The Myths of Green Energy and the Real Fuels of the Future, was published in 2010. Robert has appeared on dozens of TV and radio shows that have aired on a variety of outlets, including the BBC, MSNBC, Fox, and other networks. Other appearances on CNN's Inside Politics, PBS, the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, and a number of other shows. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Robert Bryce.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm going to make 3 points today. First, simple math and scale. Second, I'm going to discuss basic physics and density. And finally, the top of the second inning. I'm going to talk about tight gas, tight oil, the shale revolution, and how that's changing the American energy picture in ways that were not even dreamed of 4 years ago. First, simple math and the issue of scale. And I'm going to spend a fair amount of time talking about scale. Why? Because you will not hear this discussion in the mainstream media, nor will you hear it coming from Sierra Club, Greenpeace, etc. Pop quiz. I hope you studied. Who can name the country which between 2001 and 2010 had the biggest percentage increase in CO2 emissions? Anyone? China's a good guess. Anyone else? India's not a bad guess. Vietnam. Who can name the country which over that same time period had the biggest percentage increase in coal consumption? Vietnam. Who can name the country which over that same time period had the biggest percentage increase in electricity generation? Attaboy. Sure, those are fun facts to know and tell, but to me they go to the heart of the issue that we've been hearing about for the last decade. It was the decade of Al Gore. It was the decade of several IPCC reports. Numerous meetings, climate change meetings, Cancun, Copenhagen, Bonn, Durban. The Kyoto Protocol discussions continued throughout the last decade, and yet my response to all of that, and the reality rather, of all of those discussions, of all of those reports, of all of those headlines, meetings, etc., what happened? Nothing happened. There were no carbon caps put into place, no carbon taxes enacted. Europe, yes, they embraced a cap and trade system that has failed miserably. But why has all that failed? What happened in that decade of failure to come to any decision, any agreement on carbon issues? Why did it fail? Because of countries like Vietnam, a country of 90 million people with a per capita income of $1,200 on average. We can talk all day, all night, all decade, and we have about carbon taxes. Just yesterday, The Guardian reported that Al Gore, now that Obama has been reelected, has said, well, now we need a carbon tax. What happened over the last decade? Over the past decade, global energy consumption increased by 28%. It rose by the equivalent of 53 million barrels of oil, or roughly 6 Saudi Arabias. That's the amount of energy consumption increase. What's my job? My job is to make the complex simple. My job is to make complicated ideas, complicated math, so simple my mother gets them the first time. Love my mom. She's 87, lives in Tulsa, spry, widely read. But she's not an engineer, nor is she a mathematician. So over the last decade alone, we've seen an increase of 28%, 53 million barrels of oil equivalent. That is the equivalent of 6 Saudi Arabias of increased energy consumption. Since the 70s, the Saudis have been producing an average of 8.2 million barrels of oil per day. So in the last decade alone, we've added 6 Saudi Arabias to global commercial energy consumption. That's everything: coal, oil, natural gas, etc. The problem, the issue when it comes to scale, is the issue of the tyranny of big numbers. What is the tyranny of big numbers? Here it is. On an average day, we humans on this planet, 7 billion of us, consume 247 million barrels of oil equivalent of primary energy. That's coal, oil, natural gas, hydro, biofuels, wind, solar, etc. 247 million barrels of oil equivalent, that's 30 Saudi Arabias. And of that, we get 87%, 215 million barrels of oil equivalent from hydrocarbons, coal, oil, and natural gas. 215 million barrels of oil equivalent, that's 26 Saudi Arabias. We get 10 Saudis from oil, 7 from nat gas, and 9 in the form of coal. So we can talk again all day, all night, whether CO2 is good, bad, indifferent. Me, I'm a resolute agnostic. Tell me CO2 is good, makes plants greener. Tell me it's bad, that catastrophe is on the way. Fine. What we've seen in the last decade in particular is increased tribalism. Are you a catastrophist, an alarmist, or are you a denier? And if you are a denier, then clearly you work for BHP Billiton or ExxonMobil or any of the other evil big oil enterprises. And if you're a catastrophist, well, then you work for Sierra Club, etc. All we've seen is tribalism. Which camp are you in? Are you a catastrophist, or are you a denier? And very seldom, in all of that discussion do we hear any discussion of the numbers. What will it take then to move us off of hydrocarbons? Where will we find 26 Saudi Arabias of carbon-free energy that we can provide every day, 365 days a year? Where will it come from? How will we get there? What are the pathways? What is the solar-powered, wind-powered, unobtainium-powered something that is going to move us away from hydrocarbons? The math simply does not work. Scale, scale, scale. Over the last decade, we've heard all this, and what happened? Global CO2 emissions increased by 30%. Energy consumption increased by 28%. CO2 emissions increased by 30%. Just for reference, the 5 countries with the biggest percentage increase between 2001 and 2010, Vietnam 137%, China 123%, Qatar 115%, Trinidad 84%, and India 78%. The biggest increase in nominal terms, which of course is the more important number. China's increased 4.6 billion tons of CO2 increase. Think about that. In a decade, China's CO2 emissions increased by about the amount of all US CO2 emissions. China, 4.6 gigatons, 4.6 billion tons. India, 748 billion tons. A million tons, forgive me. Saudi Arabia, 220, Iran, 212, and South Korea, 174. Those 5 countries alone accounted for about 6 billion tons, 6 gigatons of CO2 increase, or about 80% of the entire CO2 increase over that decade. What happened over that past decade? US CO2 emissions fell by 4.4%. And here's a figure you will never hear from the Sierra Club, Greenpeace, Natural Resources Defense Council, etc. By the way, a lot of those people don't like me. Can't be friends with everybody. You will never hear this fact from them. Over the last decade, US CO2 emissions could have gone to 0, and global CO2 emissions still would have increased. In fact, they would have increased by about 7%, or about 1.8 gigatons. The idea that the US is going to solve this issue, that we're going to solve the climate crisis. This is in fact, that was Al Gore's exact wording yesterday, solve the climate crisis, that we are going to solve the climate crisis, is fundamentally false. It will not, cannot happen. The issue now is not the United States. We are leading the world in reductions of CO2 emissions, largely because we're displacing coal with natural gas. And these claims that somehow we're going to be the leader and change the world on our own is fundamentally wrong. Why? Because we have billions of people who are living in the dark, and they want to come into the light. And what do they want? They want electricity. Since 1985 to today, global electricity demand has increased by about 450 terawatt hours per year. This is an important scale number. 450 terawatt hours of electricity generation increase. A terawatt hour is 1 trillion watt hours. We've been adding roughly 1 Brazil per year to the global electric grid every year for the last 30 years, and we're going to continue adding about that much demand every year for the next 20 to 25 years. Those aren't my projections. You can look at BP, IEA, EIA, any of the major analysis reports that come out on this. About 450 terawatt hours of electricity generation increase is what's expected. It's roughly 1 Brazil of new demand every year. Well, let's talk about that then. So we hear solar and wind continually, that they are going to be the sources of the future. What would it require if we were just going to meet that incremental demand, the 450 terawatt hours of new demand with solar? Well, let's look at Germany. Germany has more installed photovoltaic capacity than any other country on the planet, about 25,000 megawatts, 25 gigawatts. Last year, all of that solar in Germany produced about 19 terawatt hours of electricity. Therefore, just to keep pace with demand, not to displace any coal, not to displace any natural gas or nuclear or hydro, just to meet demand, new demand, with solar PV would require installing 23 times, roughly 23 times Germany's entire installed photovoltaic base every year. Scale. What if we wanted to meet that same incremental demand with wind? Well, if you look at the data, in 2011, looked at these numbers, in fact, just this morning. The BP Statistical Review has the data. You can double check my numbers if you like. Last year, global wind energy production was 437 terawatt hours. 437. We need 450 just to meet demand. And that 437 terawatt hours was produced from 240 gigawatts, 240,000 megawatts of installed wind capacity. Therefore, in rough terms, if we're just going to meet new demand with wind energy, we will have to install roughly the entire world's installed wind energy base that we have now, 240 gigawatts, every year. And to do that, we'd have to cover a land area of roughly 45,000 square miles, or land area roughly the size of the state of New York. Scale, scale, scale. Last year, because of this electric demand, because of the soaring electric demand, global coal consumption increased by the equivalent of 3.9 million barrels of oil per day, half of a Saudi Arabia. That increase in coal consumption, 3.9 million barrels of oil equivalent per day, is roughly equal to all global solar, all global wind, and all global biomass combined. Let me repeat that. In 1 year, global coal demand increased by as much as all global solar, all global wind, and all global biomass combined. I'm not opposed to renewables. In certain areas, they make perfect sense. I live in Austin, Texas. By the way, for the record, I'm opposed to all energy subsidies, unless, of course, I'm getting them. I live in Austin, Texas. I have 3,200 watts of solar panels on the roof of my house. Why? Because the city of Austin gave me a nice big fat subsidy to do so. We hear about all of these sources that, oh, well, they are the sources of the future. Well, they may be, but they depend heavily on subsidies. And now I'm talking about my own personal experience with this. Those solar panels provide about a third of the electricity that my family and I use. My wife and I have 3 kids. My neighbors come by, oh, love your solar panels. I say, thank you very much. You help pay for them. Scale, scale, scale. How many here have heard of a man named Bill McKibben? McKibben's an activist. He was a leader of the group that circled the White House, remember, a year ago last August in opposition to the Keystone XL pipeline. McKibben's stance on fossil fuels is this, and now he's going around the country on a program to promote his group called 350.org. His belief is that the global atmosphere ideal CO2 concentration is 350 parts per million. To achieve that, McKibben says we need to cut fossil fuel consumption globally by 20-fold, a 20-fold reduction in current fossil fuel consumption. Told you before, we have about 215 million barrels of oil equivalent per day in coal oil and natural gas. If we cut that by a factor of 20, it takes us down to about 11 million barrels of oil equivalent per day. That's roughly the energy consumption of the country of India. I've been doing the math on this. I'm working on another book, so I've been doing very simple math. It's the only kind I can do. If you take McKibben at his word, and he will allow then 11 million barrels of oil equivalent per day for 7 billion people on the planet, the simple math shows that the ration then, if we make this equal for everyone, all of the residents on planet Earth will be allotted 1/4 of 1 liter of hydrocarbon energy per day. 1/4 of 1 liter of hydrocarbon energy per day. The average American uses about 5 gallons of oil equivalent energy from hydrocarbons every day. And in McKibben's view of the world, we will go from 5 gallons to 8 fluid ounces. 1 cup. From 5 gallons to 1 cup. These numbers are easily verifiable. It's not my data. But we never hear the issue of scale in these discussions because the green left knows it is not a winning argument for them. They would rather say hydrocarbons are bad, big oil is bad, ExxonMobil is bad, natural gas is bad, and coal especially is bad. The Sierra Club alone has a beyond coal, a beyond oil, and a beyond natural gas campaign. I think it's beyond crazy, but that's just me. So that's it on scale. Scale is incredibly important. It's one of the issues Ed kindly mentioned in my book. I talk about it in this book, Power Hungry. I talk about it in 4 imperatives: power density, energy density, cost, and scale. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your employees, you don't have to read it. You just have to buy it. All right, moving on. Basic physics, another quiz. Not really a quiz, but nevertheless, a show of hands. Who here considers themselves educated? Come on, I know we're in Arkansas. Come on, be proud. Keep your hands up. Who of those who consider themselves educated can name 2 works of Shakespeare? Okay. Now, keep your hands up. You can name 2 works of Shakespeare. How many of you, honestly, can name the first and second laws of thermodynamics? I see 1 hand. It's amazing, isn't it? The most fundamental issues in physics. And I can find 1 hand in an audience of 500 that can honestly tell me, first law, energy is neither created nor destroyed. Second law, in a closed system, heat energy tends toward randomness. Very simple definitions for a very complicated issue. But it speaks to the heart of why I wrote Power Hungry, why I do what I do. Why? Because the U.S. electorate and the U.S. our elected officials, I know Governor Beebe's gone, maybe we could ask him this quiz. We Americans are scientifically illiterate and we're innumerate. And you add those 2 together and it's a toxic cocktail. And it's a reason why we have so much bad policy. But in that little demonstration, I've shown what I think is a profound scientific illiteracy for what is the most basic, effectively the most basic issues in science. And yet, why are we at this juncture, particularly in American politics? Well, part of it is that the vast majority of our politicians are lawyers. Why are they lawyers? Couldn't hack the math to get into engineering school. No offense to any of the politicians here. We have about a dozen doctors in the U.S. House of Representatives, and we have 1 engineer. The vast majority of the rest are lawyers. We have a supermajority in the Senate made up of lawyers, and the bills that they write are written for other lawyers. They're not written with engineering background. They're not written with a mathematical background. I bring up this quiz because this is not a new issue. In the 1950s, there was a British novelist and scientist named C.P. Snow. He became famous for an essay called The Two Cultures. He said on one side are the humanities and science is on the other, and the 2 sides don't talk. And he said, between the 2, this is his quote, sits a gulf of mutual incomprehension. A gulf of mutual incomprehension. And that is, in fact, what we're faced with. When we have politicians saying, oh, yes, let's do wind, let's do solar, with no understanding of the physics behind it, nor any understanding of power density. Density is green. Density is green. And I don't care whether you're talking about agricultural production here in Arkansas, or you're talking about oil production in a Texas oil field, or you're talking about an engine in a Ford automobile. High density is good for the environment. Why? Because it allows us to do more with less. I'm working on a new book, and the idea is about technology, technological change. Density is good. I'm amazed at this little device. It's an amazing computer, kind of a crappy telephone. Who here remembers the Motorola StarTAC, right? The first, truly, the brick, right? It was about this big and held 30 phone numbers. 30 phone numbers. Wow, that was amazing. In the 1980s, today we want this to do everything but, slice carrots. Energy density. Density is green. Why? Because it allows us to do more with less. We want small footprints. The British writer E.F. Schumacher had it exactly right in his 1970s book, Small is Beautiful. A small footprint is the environmental ideal. Let me talk about power density. Basic term in physics. What is power density? Power density is a measure of energy flow that can be harnessed in a given area, volume, or mass. Basic physics. Energy is the ability to do work. Power is the rate at which work gets done. Energy is a barrel of oil, 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas, a ton of coal. Power is the rate at which we turn that energy into something that's useful. Energy is a sum. Power, by definition, is a rate. 1 joule per second equals 1 watt. The key there is per. It is a rate. 1 joule per second equals 1 watt. Energy is measured in watts. Energy is measured in joules. Power is measured in watts in the SI system. You can use BTUs, horsepower, doesn't matter. Energy and power are not the same things. Power density, measure of energy flow that can be harnessed in a given area, volume, or mass. Let me demonstrate why this matters. I live in Austin. City owns 16% of the South Texas project. It's a twin reactor, 2,700 megawatt nuclear project. Covers a land area of about 19 square miles, a land area a little smaller than the island of Manhattan. Manhattan's about 23 square miles. 19 square miles, 2,700 megawatts. Do the simple math, you get a power density on that entire footprint of 56 watts per square meter. I did a very conservative calculation. Took the whole footprint of the whole area, 56 watts per square meter. The critical infrastructure obviously is a fraction of that 19 square miles, but nevertheless, I wanted to use the most conservative numbers, 56 watts per square meter. What if we wanted 2,700 megawatts of generation capacity and we wanted to use wind turbines? We need a land area of about 25 Manhattan islands. Why? Because the power density of wind, I don't care where you put it, is roughly 2 watts per square meter. 2 watts per square meter. What about corn ethanol? Sitting at a table with Jack Williams, he was telling me how much he loves ethanol. Hoping Tyson's lobbying for an extension. He's not. Quick aside on the corn ethanol scam. It is the longest running robbery of American taxpayers in this country's history. It is one of the most objectionable programs ever passed by the US Congress. We are mandated to use a hydrophilic, low heat content, corrosive fuel in our gasoline. We're now consuming 40% of US corn. It's roughly 15% of global corn, 5% of all global grain, in order to produce the energy equivalent of 0.7% of global oil needs. This is madness. This passes the idea of madness on the fly and goes into a realm that I can't name. We are burning food to make motor fuel at a time when we have no shortage of fuel and we have shortages of food. I could go all Joel Osteen on you here about how morally corrupt this whole thing is, but I'm going to let it go. Leave Joel Osteen out of this. Corn ethanol. If you wanted 2,700 megawatts of generation capacity using corn ethanol, you would need a land area of 54,000 square kilometers, a land area roughly the size of the state of West Virginia, a land area roughly the size of 1,100 Manhattan islands. Why? Because the power density of biofuels, and I don't care if you're talking corn ethanol, switchgrass, poplar trees, rapeseed oil, the power density of biofuels is measured in the tenths of a watt per square meter. You can't get there from here when it comes to biofuels. We could convert all US corn into ethanol, and we would equal about 6%, 7% of all US oil needs. We could drive, but we couldn't eat. Let me move on now. Get all calm down up here. Sit down for a second. What about oil and power density? You require the BP spill a couple of summers ago now, the Macondo well accident. The height of the accident, we had live video footage from 5,000 feet below the ocean's, the surface of the ocean, with live video footage of the oil coming out of the pipe. That alone was an amazing feat. Set aside the fact that BP was out there in 5,000 feet of water doing what is the marine equivalent of the space program, and all of it privately funded. Set aside all of that. And let's do a quick power density calculation. The Transocean Deepwater Horizon had an aerial footprint of about 9,000 square meters. Forget the amount of natural gas that was coming out of the wellbore. Let's just look at the oil. If you just use the oil and the energy contained in that oil and use the square footage of that, the Deepwater Horizon, the power density of that vessel was about 127,000 watts per square meter. The Deepwater Horizon is not anything unusual in terms of deepwater drilling and production. Many vessels, many platforms are capable of producing 50,000 barrels of oil per day. Why was BP out there taking company-killing risks? Why is ExxonMobil doing the same? Chevron doing the same? Statoil, Hydro, Petrobras, Petronas, Shell. Why are all these companies out there taking risks that could kill their company, paying lease rates of $1 million, $2 million, paying rental rates on their rigs of $1 million, $2 million a day? Why? Because they can achieve power density numbers they can only otherwise achieve inside the core of a nuclear reactor. That's why. Density, density, density. We humans, in fact, are prime examples of density. Nature tends toward density. Yes, it tends toward randomness. But what we humans have been pursuing and what we humans embody, in fact, is density. Here's a mind-blowing statistic, and it happens to be true. The human brain has a gravimetric power density that is 100,000 times that of the sun. The human brain accounts for about 20% of all the energy consumed, or the power flow in the body. Human body averages about 100 watts, continuous. 20% is in the brain. It works out to about 13 to 16 watts per kilogram in the human brain. Makes sense when you think about it. It's wet, fatty tissue. The sun is hot plasma. It's gas. The human brain has a power density 100,000 times that of the sun. And what has the human brain allowed us to do? It's allowed us to increase density in everything we do, in everything we pursue, from food production to automobiles. 1908, Henry Ford introduced the Model T. A 2.9-liter engine produced 22 horsepower. Today, if you live in Europe and the engine is coming to the US, you can buy a vehicle from Ford, a three-cylinder, 1-liter, turbocharged engine known as the EcoBoost, just was named the International Engine of the Year. It gets 123 horsepower from 1 liter of displacement. 123 horsepower from 1 liter. In roughly a century, the engineers at Ford have increased the power density of their base engine 16-fold and increased the efficiency by a factor of 3. Were there mandates? Yeah, there were some federal mandates, of course. But Ford knows what Intel knows, what Caterpillar knows, what every driller knows, what we humans know instinctively. Density is where the money is. I graduated from high school in Tulsa, Bishop Kelly High School in 1978. It was the beginning of the personal computer revolution. Intel was creating all the chips for those personal computers. The 8086 processor was the brain of all of those computers. It had 29,000 transistors. Today, you can buy Intel's top-of-the-line chip, top-of-the-line microprocessor known as Ivy Bridge. It has 2.3 billion transistors. In the 30-some years since I graduated from high school, Intel has increased the computing power density on its top-of-the-line chips 78,000-fold. No government mandates, no requirements. Intel knows where the money is to be made, and the money is to be made in density. The lower the density, the higher the resource intensity. If you have a farm that's only producing 30 bushels of wheat per acre, and you have a target of 1,000, well, and you have another farm that's producing 100 bushels, you need a lot more land, a lot more diesel fuel, a lot more seed, a lot more everything. It's obvious. And yet, what is the spoken policy of the Green Left here in the United States and around the world? It is this. They want to replace high power density sources. They want to replace high power density sources that are dispatchable, reliable, and low cost with low power density sources that are not dispatchable, highly variable, and high cost. I think this is madness. Let me move on to the top of the second inning. and I'll wrap up. I hope you have some questions or comments. Top of the second inning. The shale revolution is changing the U.S. energy picture in ways we could never have dreamed. And it's all positive. And to torture the baseball analogy even further, the U.S. is playing a home game. We invented all the equipment. We wrote all the rules. We have all the best players. We have the dream team, in fact. Our home field advantage is like that of no other country in the world in that our home field is loaded with hydrocarbons. So much we can't even figure out how much we have. The development of shale gas and shale oil in the United States is the single most important development in the U.S. energy scene and the global energy scene since the discovery of the East Texas field in 1930. But it's more important than the East Texas field. Why? Because the East Texas field didn't have any kids. The shale revolution, which started in the Barnett Shale, some will say it started in the Antrim Shale in Michigan, doesn't matter. The shale revolution, which started here in the United States, is now going global. The Barnett Shale and the Antrim have had lots of kids already. The Haynesville, the Utica, the Marcellus, the Eagleford, the Bakken. And they're now going to have kids overseas. A quick note on overseas, it's going to take a lot of time for shale gas to occur overseas. Why? Because they don't have the rigs, they don't have the rednecks, and they don't have the pipes. We have plenty of rigs, buku rednecks, and the best pipeline infrastructure in the world. Add in the fact that the rest of the world does not have private ownership of mineral rights, and you're seeing now why there's significant pushback in Western Europe against shale drilling in Western Europe. But nevertheless, let me go on and talk about the points here on why the shale revolution is so important. First is price, industrial renaissance. Third is carbon dioxide. Fourth is innovation. Price. From the 6-year period between 2003 and 2008, nat gas prices in the U.S. averaged over $7. Spot price on today, I didn't check at Henry Hub, we'll call it $3.50. 4 years ago, November 14th of 2008, it was $6.33. Just 4 years ago. So let's just use that $3 price differential from 2008 to today. The savings to the U.S. economy is $200 million a day. That's $73 billion a year. To his credit, President Obama gets it. In his acceptance speech at the Democratic National Convention, he named one industry with regard to jobs. It was the natural gas sector, and said it will create 600,000 new jobs. That's probably a low number. You throw in the oil sector, and it's in the millions. This is a windfall for the U.S. at a time when it is desperately needed, when the rest of the economy is struggling mightily. And it's leading to what? An industrial renaissance that no one could have predicted. And it's coming at the expense of the Europeans, and the Europeans are worried. Look at Germany. They've decided under Merkel and the influence of the Greens, to shut down their nuclear plants. What are they building? They're building coal plants, but that's another discussion. And their electricity prices are skyrocketing. And what are they going to pay for natural gas? 2 to 3 to 4 times what manufacturers here in the United States can get. Japan, similar problem. Landing 1 million BTUs of natural gas with LNG in Japan, latest spot price, roughly $17. What's the situation here in the U.S.? An incredible resurgence in steel manufacturing, in forging, in electricity generation, all of it natural gas fired. I talked to Dan D'Amico, the CEO of Nucor, America's biggest steel producer, about 18 months ago. He said this: we could change the entire manufacturing base in the U.S. if we just embrace what's happening in natural gas. It's a game changer for manufacturing, the trade deficit, and jobs. Nucor is now spending $750 million on a new direct reduced iron plant in St. James Parish, Louisiana. They may invest as much as $3 billion in direct reduced iron steel production here in the United States. What are they doing? They just signed a deal, or it was just announced in the Oil and Gas Journal the other day. Nucor has now bought into the upstream, and they have a drilling program with Encana to assure them a 20-year supply of natural gas here in the United States. No one could have predicted this even 3 years ago, even 4 years ago. D'Amico told me something that's fascinating. He said when they were applying for the permit for this plant in Louisiana, they had an entirely different plant design in mind. And while they were waiting for the very long process of permitting to happen, the shale revolution happened. They changed their entire plan. And he said, thank God it took so long. We would have gone and invested in the wrong technology at the wrong time. This is incredibly positive news. Petrochemical production. PricewaterhouseCoopers just the other day announced $15 billion in new ethylene production capacity in the United States will occur over the next few years. Refining, another area that will benefit mightily. Are these green jobs? I don't care. You can call them purple striped paisley jobs. They're jobs, and they're good paying jobs at a time when they are desperately needed here in the United States. CO2 emissions. The U.S. has reduced its CO2 emissions more than any other country over the last 6 years. Not my data. The International Energy Agency announced it in May. Why? Because of coal to gas switching. So the U.S. can congratulate itself. Well, don't get it too big of a hurry to congratulate yourself if your issue is CO2. Why? Because over the last 6 years, U.S. coal exports have doubled. The coal that is not being burned in the U.S. is now being burned overseas. Where is the biggest destination for U.S. coal? Europe. America's coal consumption has dropped by 50 million tons. We are now exporting about 50 million tons of coal per year to Europe. Top of the second inning, and innovation. I have to mention Southwestern, it's only coincidence that I'm here in Arkansas. Southwestern is an example of the innovation that continues in the upstream that will continue to keep hydrocarbons competitive relative to green energy, green technologies. In 2000, a share of Southwestern sold for $1. Haven't checked it today. Last time I looked, it was roughly $30, $32. What happened? In 2000, it was producing about 32 billion cubic feet of gas equivalent. In 2011, it produced 500 billion cubic feet of gas equivalent. What's Southwestern's record? It's interesting. They're one of the few companies that publish their data on time to drill wells, productivity, et cetera. Between 2007 and 2011, the cost of an average well for Southwestern in the Fayetteville Shale stayed flat at about $3 million apiece. But over that same time period, it cut the time to drill for each well from 17 days to 8. Over that same time period, it increased the horizontal segment of the well, quick oil and gas primer. Horizontal drilling, you drill a vertical well bore, then you turn the drill bit 90 degrees, and you go out into the hydrocarbon bearing zone, the shale. Why? Because you want maximum exposure of the well to the production zone. They've increased the length of that, what is known as the lateral, from 2,100 feet to nearly 4,900 feet. And what's been the result? They have doubled the amount of gas that they produced during the first 2 months of production. So to repeat, they kept the price of the well the same over a 5-year period, roughly. They cut the time to drill the well in half, and they doubled the production. That's what smart operators do. It's what any smart business does. You cut expenses, try to grow output. And Southwestern is a prime example of that. Now let me conclude. The 19th century and pre-19th century was dominated by solid fuels. You can think of our fuel mix as the 3 phases of matter. We're in the phase of solid fuels, wood and coal. We are now solidly in the liquid age. We're moving to gaseous fuels, solids to liquids to gas. What is this? What happens in that transition? We decarbonize. We go from 10 carbon atoms for every 1 hydrogen in wood to natural gas, CH4, 1 carbon for every 4 hydrogens, and you get a 40-fold improvement in the carbon to hydrogen ratio. As we move to nuclear, natural gas and carbon drop out altogether. I'm incredibly optimistic about natural gas. The world is awash in natural gas. We don't know how much gas there is on the planet. It is more, as my father used to say, than we can say grace over. We have a superabundance of natural gas. I'm adamantly pro-nuclear. Why? My feelings on nuclear are very clear. If you're anti-carbon dioxide and anti-nuclear, you are pro-blackout. I'm anti-blackout. I'm in favor of cold beer and air conditioning for everybody. We have 1.3 billion people today still living without electricity. We have 2.6 billion, according to the International Energy Agency, who are still living without clean cooking facilities. We need to produce a lot more energy globally to bring more people out of poverty and into the light. I'll end with this quote from William Stanley Jevons, the first energy economist. In 1865, he wrote a book called The Coal Question. He wrote, "Energy is the universal aid, the factor in everything we do. With it, almost any feat is possible or easy. Without it, we are thrown back into the laborious poverty of early times." We need to produce a lot more energy, both here in the United States and around the world, so we can bring more people out of the dark and into the light. We need more energy because we need to be able to make that energy flow. Why? Because we are all, yes, power hungry. It is our nature to make energy flow. And when we do so, we can educate our children. We can make things that are valuable and come out of the dark and into the light. Thank you. You've been very attentive. I appreciate Randy, the invitation. Thank you kindly. Thank you. Thank you. I have about 5 minutes for questions. If anybody has any or wants to speak up, I can repeat your question if you like. Anyone brave or foolish enough to speak up? Randy, I don't think you got a quiet crowd here. Okay then. Well, I think I'm done then. Thank you kindly. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes the formal part of our program. We will have a short session. I've got some remarks to make about the performance of the chamber over the last year or so, but before that, let me call Eddie Drilling back up to the stage. Ed, if you'd come back up, please. Any of you who are in the business, similar association management or whatever, likely understand that the selection of volunteer leadership is an art form. I have been blessed in the short time I've been with the State Chamber to have terrific volunteer leadership. Certainly Ray Dillon, Hugh McDonald, Randy Wilburn, Benny Baker, Bill Hanna. Bill is not with us today, but Eddie is, and I'd like to present Eddie with this plaque, a form of a plaque. It's too dangerous to take out of the box. It's a pretty effective weapon if you choose to use it that way. But it is just an expression of thanks and appreciation for one of the very best chairmen you have had of the State Chamber, Ed Drilling. Thank you, Ed. We have had a good year of solid results in our activities. Our membership continues to be very stable, even growing and expanding, which is very unusual given the state of the economy over the last couple of 3 years. But nevertheless, we have been able to maintain and grow our membership. This is, I think, a tribute to the quality of the programming that we're offering and some other activities that have helped keep us in good shape. As a result, we are in excellent shape financially. So this is, again, a tribute to the membership and something we do not take lightly but appreciate very much. One of the primary programs that we have conducted over the last few years is Leadership Arkansas, which was begun at the State Chamber when Paul Harville was president. This program has grown over the few short years we've been operating it to the point that we have over 350 graduates. We have class number 7 with us today, which is about 41 participants. They're having one of their sessions in Little Rock today. How about y'all standing up and just waving or doing something halfway appropriate? Where is the leadership crew, or have they gone on to their meeting? I guess they have. We'll skip that. The second very fine program that we're operating and that has sort of been resurrected under the leadership of Sue Weeder is the Governor's Quality Award Program. This program had fallen on pretty tough times and was in pretty sad shape just about 3 or 4 years ago when Sue took it over. It's now been recognized as one of the 5 top quality award and quality management programs in the country. This operation has presented quality awards now to 16 organizations across Arkansas in 2012 at our latest session just about a month or so ago. We had about 400 people who attended that event. They've also attended industry-specific training sessions during the year, and it's just been a really fine program. Our Pinnacle membership program also continues to grow. We have more Pinnacle members today than ever before, and again, we deeply appreciate their support and activity. Our DC fly-in is coming up. It will be in April in the spring. We haven't selected the exact date yet, but stay tuned for that date. It really is a very successful activity conducted in association with lots of the community chambers across the state. We'll take about 150 or so people from Arkansas to DC for a couple of days of on the Hill lobbying with our delegation and a big dinner, which is one of the highlights for the staff members of our congressional delegation's offices. And this is a major activity for us. I think if we survive the fiscal cliff into the spring, it will be a very timely trip because it's doubtful that all of the fiscal issues, the fiscal restructuring and tax restructuring that we're going to need to do, it's doubtful that that will all be completed by then. More than likely, we will have kicked the can down the road, down yet another road, before we finally get some sort of big deal, but to try to get the country's budget and the deficit under control. So please plan to participate in that activity if at all possible, because your presence on that trip makes all the difference in the world. Its success is dependent on the participation of our members. We recently conducted in conjunction with the U.S. Chamber, a Hiring Our Heroes event, which was a job fair for veterans. We are told by the U.S. Chamber folks that it's one of the best that's been conducted in the country. We had 93 employers and over 300 returning veteran job seekers, many of whom were able to make good connections at that event. We likely will repeat that in at least one other location in the state over the next few months, and it was a big success. Susie Marks gets great marks, terrific. Susie Marks gets a lot of credit for doing a great job with that. I wish you could have seen the success of the event as reflected in the expressions from those veterans. Susie also runs the Small Business Procurement Conference, which helps connect small businesses with real business opportunities, primarily with state agencies, government entities around the state. It's a big success for those who participate. And one of the things we've been doing for the last, 3 years, I guess we've done 3 or 4 of them, cycles of our door-to-door presentations around the state. This year we did 13 of them. We had about 1,000 people in those 13 locations. This thing continues to grow in popularity as we take the state chamber's agenda for upcoming legislative sessions to the communities and to the business leaders across the state for 2 purposes. Number 1 is to keep people in tune with what we're up to, and number 2 is to sound out our membership across the state to understand what are the really vital issues affecting business and how can we best act and advocate in behalf of those issues. Now, pat yourself on the back, the person next to you on the back, because your state chamber has had remarkable success over the last 3 or 4 years on several major issue campaigns, the most recent of which, of course, was the highly successful Move Arkansas Forward program, led by primarily Madison Murphy and Mark Lamberth, who were co-chairs, but also artfully managed and led by Craig Douglas I think it's Craig Douglas. What do you call yourself, Craig? Craig Douglas Communications. This was a very successful statewide program that resulted in the passage of the half-cent temporary sales tax for highway expansion and improvement across the state, a 58% favorable vote on a tax increase, albeit modest, but a tax increase was a remarkable result. And I think the people of Arkansas are going to be thrilled with the results moving forward. We're going to have a really first-rate highway system with lots of improvements for business. I know I saw Mike Malone here as we were coming in. Mike had unveiled a study recently that showed that highway congestion in northwest Arkansas alone costs that economy about $100 million a year. So expanding, widening, increasing to 6 lanes from Fayetteville to Bentonville on 540 will make an enormous amount of impact and difference in the growth opportunities in northwest Arkansas. We're going to see that play out across the state. Highways are one of those just basic building blocks of any economy. And with just prior to that, about a year ago, we also passed, of course, the state passed the renewal of the Garvey Bond program, which is going to allow the Highway Department to finish the updating and rehabilitation of the rest of the interstate mileage in Arkansas. So we're going to find ourselves in just a few short years with a really top-notch, much improved highway system. There is yet work to be done in this whole area, and we'll stay tuned. We'll be talking about that as time goes on. But I think it's especially important to pause for just a second mentally and reflect on the success of both these efforts and how they will impact the state. One that we were on the other side of, a negative effort, of course, was the severance tax campaign this past summer. We were at the tip of the spear on the opposition to reopening the severance tax on natural gas in the state. Your executive committee and leadership of the chamber recognized that this was not a wise policy, and we successfully resisted that, and it died an agonizingly but all too lengthy death. And prior to that, in November 2010, we of course led the effort on issue 2 and 3, which created lots of improvement in the economic development tools available in the state. Finally got rid of the usury burden that we had borne since, 1873 or whatever. And that had a big impact and will have an impact over the years to come. We're involved in more litigation activities today than ever before. We are providing amicus briefs in 2 issues, two. One is the standard fire insurance case, which is before the U.S. Supreme Court. This is an attempt to curb plaintiff's attorneys' ability to keep class action lawsuits in a local jurisdiction rather than in federal court. We think this will be a successful effort and will make a difference in protecting the business environment and limiting exposure to potential class action suits to reasonable amounts. We're also involved in a workers' comp amicus brief at the state Supreme Court. This is a work in progress. It is an effort to persuade the court that the Felony Tort Act does not apply to workers' comp cases. So this is a very important aspect of protecting our incredibly effective and economical workers' comp system in Arkansas. We have I think this group, the state chamber as an entity, led the effort back in the early mid-90s to pass the workers' comp system that we have today. If you'll recall, back at the time that this legislation was passed, we were down to about 5 insurance companies that were willing to write workers' comp coverage in Arkansas. Today we have over 260 insurance companies participating in a very robust and competitive workers' comp insurance market. As a result, this is a dollar and cent benefit of your membership in the state chamber. As a result, workers' comp costs in Arkansas average about $250 per year per employee. The national average is $1,000 per employee per year. So that is a $750 per employee advantage in our workers' comp costs and your workers' comp costs in Arkansas, directly resulting from the state chamber's activities. Please bear that in mind when you feel a little bit of pain as you write your dues check. We also hosted a reception at the time that Grant Tennille was appointed as Executive Director of the AEDC. This was a terrific event. We have a major event coming up in January, January 22nd. This will be our kickoff event for the chamber for the state legislative session. We're gonna stretch the political metaphor about the big tent for everybody in a party. We're going to call this the Chamber's Big Tent. We're actually going to put up a party tent on the chamber parking lot to try to accommodate the hundreds, if not thousands, of people who will be attending the event. We'll look forward to having all of you there. It will be a terrific event and a great opportunity to meet the new legislators, of which there are quite a few this time. Along that line, in the legislative arena, we conducted a series of candidate forums, which were very successful for all candidates in open seat contests. We do not extend it to where there is an incumbent, either unopposed or opposed, because it's an opportunity to provide people a chance to meet possible new members of the General Assembly, and that was a very successful program again this year. Part of that activity was based on the fact that our PAC was more active than usual because of the number of contested legislative seats. Business-friendly candidates are more important than ever to you and to your business. This year there are now 41 new House members, and we actually have, I think, 9 new Senate members, 3 of which have never been involved in a legislative body. So as a result of that, we have used about your contributions to invest about $52,000 in political contributions to legislative candidates. Back in 10, we invested about $38,000 in that activity, so the increased number of races called for the increased level of support. We think this has been a very successful effort. January 9th and 10th, we will be conducting the first ever what we're titling Business 101. This will be a 2-day session for new members of the legislature to attempt to give them a background, a knowledge base regarding issues that affect business that they will be dealing with in the legislature. We will attempt to define and describe the economy in Arkansas, what drives it, what pieces comprise it, how their activities in the legislature will affect business. We think this has the potential to be a sort of a legacy program from this point forward, and one that will be very constructive. We will do everything possible to ensure that it's nonpartisan and fact-based. It will not be an advocacy agenda or forum, but instead a bona fide effort to try to get folks who may not have much of any background or experience in businesses. Many of our new legislators are coming from work experiences or career fields where they've just simply not been exposed to a lot of the issues that we all as business people take as sort of our second nature. So that we think that's going to be a very constructive activity, and we look forward to conducting it January 9th and 10th at the Chamber office. we're hopeful that we fill up our room and have to go across the street to the AT&T auditorium. It's got the potential for that because theoretically we could have 50 or 60 folks that would participate in it. Let's hope that comes together as we hope that it will. And let me just, in closing, underscore the governor's remarks about the importance of this organization and its counterparts across the state, all of the community chambers. It's more important than ever that we engage in the politics of today's environment. There are more and more issues that affect your business every day under consideration, not only in the legislature, but the Congress as well, and certainly in the regulatory agencies, both at the state level and the national level. And the phrase that always sticks in my mind when I start contemplating this whole subject is, if you're not at the table, you will indeed be on the menu. And this is something that we simply must bear in mind regarding support of, encouragement of, identification of, and election of people who get it in terms of business and their impact, their potential impact on the job creating potential of the businesses across the state. Every person taking a seat in this General Assembly, will have run on a platform of improving jobs, growing jobs in Arkansas. That will not happen unless this organization's members engage and make clear to the members of the General Assembly what does indeed affect your business in a positive way, and likewise what does indeed affect your business in a negative way. And it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we get that education effort and that persuasion effort to succeed. Appreciate very much your coming today. If there are any questions regarding chamber activities or the status of your chamber, I'll be happy to take them now. If you want to catch me after we break up, that's fine as well. I'll be here for a good while. So thank you very much for coming. Appreciate your time. Thanks for a good year.
Thank you. Thank you, President Zook. And although it's been said several times today, we'd like to add one more time. Thank you for your continued support of the State Chamber, AIA. Thank you for coming today. Have a safe trip home. We'll see you again next year.